I wanted to say this is that he reminds me of those Christians that have signs that, when they're burying a man or woman that had AIDS, and they're saying they're going to burn in hell, God hates you.
No, the Westboro Baptist Church. Right?
Yeah, he spews hate. He doesn't teach love and Torah and what we should do and the commandments and trying to understand things. It's everything he's about is spewing hatred. I see his videos and I don't even want to watch because all I get out of it at the end is just a bad feeling. It's just spewing hate. So that's my comment.
That's it. All right. Anyways, new topic. So let's see.
Let's not give him the time of day, but we're friendly people.
Freedom of the pulpit here. Freedom of the pulpit.
I think that's the unique thing. I know I say this probably every week, but this is a beautiful thing that we open up this room for people to come in and chat, talk Torah, and pontificate and bounce ideas off of.
That's it. And no one here is going to be attacked.
I'm doing my best. I'm striving. We do have Nisa Haya out there. Question: my son wants to join the army and has been thinking about all sorts of scenarios. He asked about Torah outlook on war. We know that Torah says do not murder, but what about this situation? God forbid his friend is dying and they won't be able to get help. Is he allowed to shoot him out of mercy? I didn't know what to say. That's actually a really powerful question.
Right. It's interesting. The Talmud mentions the death of Shaul Melech, King Saul. One rendition of his death is that he fell on his own sword. So like another instance mentioned mainly in Josephus about the siege on Masada, where the Romans were surrounding and besieging a bunch of zealot religious Jews. And the understanding is that they killed each other. And then the last individual who was supposed to just kill himself didn't and lived to tell the story. And in one of those instances, one of the men was Josephus, but it also happened in Masada. The notion of putting people out of their misery, in the case of Masada and in the case of Shaul Melech, it was praised because by them remaining alive and being tortured by their enemies, it would have made Judaism look bad. Someone committing suicide for no reason just because they hate life has always been prohibited. But for a purpose, it seems like it was endorsed for a time till the Achronim made a blanket statement that people have to stay alive till their last heartbeat. I had a friend, his name was Victor Akko. He was a member of the Jewish community here in South Florida, and he got cancer. I'm not sure where it started, somewhere in his lungs, and it spread all over his body. He was suffering. And he basically wanted to kill himself just so he could stop suffering. We would have discussions about it. How would it benefit the Jewish people to have this man suffer till his last breath? That doesn't appear like this in the Torah, and it doesn't appear like this by the rabbis. It's a much, much later notion that someone has to die on their own and not. Now, this is a very controversial topic, but I'm just telling you what appears in the Talmud and what appears in the Torah. The Torah doesn't seem to prohibit this notion of assisted suicide, not to desecrate the person's dignity or the dignity of the Jewish people. And that's exactly what it is. If you're on chemotherapy and you're already a treifa, you're gonna die 100%. Assuming there wasn't medication that would help you not feel the pain, what would really be against, from a rabbinic or Torah perspective, to give your buddy a gun and say, look, do what you gotta do? I don't see the prohibition. I just don't see the prohibition. Now, someone could enlighten me from a Mishnaic perspective or from the Torah where that's actually prohibited. But I've seen too many people die of cancer to assume that this is what God wanted to happen. Also, there's a big debate amongst the rabbis, what constitutes death? Talmudic times, they would put a feather up to your nose. And if the feather would move, it means that you were still alive. But nowadays, that doesn't constitute death. It's brain death. There's people who could be in a completely vegetative state, and you're not allowed to pull the plug. This is something that's really not mentioned in the Talmud. It's not mentioned in the Torah. And I don't know why rabbis speak of it like a clear-cut case. It's not really clear-cut. And I think that many people have suffered when they didn't have to suffer. When
Rabbi,
perhaps...
Yeah. Interesting you should bring that up, because this week I was studying the Rambam, how you can do, either 3 chapters a day or 1 chapter a day.
Mm.
And with the 1 chapter a day, which I want to do, the whole cycle will come up really soon. So I wanted to do it when everyone else is doing it. So I was looking a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end. And I came across a very topic, talking about a series of people for whom we mourn, such as those fetuses that have not gone full term, and it says when a person commits suicide, we do not engage in activity on their behalf at all. We do not mourn for him or eulogize him. And when I read that, I thought it was pretty harsh.
In the Talmud, it says that if someone commits suicide, not only don't you mourn, you have a festive meal on top of his grave. That leads me to believe that it's not a suicide to save the dignity of the Jewish people, because if it's like that, like, what do you think dying al Kiddush Hashem is? Dying al Kiddush Hashem, which the Rambam brings down as the 9th mitzvah, is doing something that you know it's going to get you killed, but you do it anyways to bring honor to God's name. Now, how is that not self-inflicted suicide? It's really the same thing. Instead of you pressing a button, the Kevorkian machine, or paying some guy to shoot you, you're basically going to stand up and testify that you believe in God, knowing that it's going to get you killed. What it means is people killing themselves because they just don't want to live anymore, almost in a gratuitous fashion. It's not that you're being tortured or there's a fear of being tortured by the cancer or by the Romans, and you're choosing death instead of that. So that cannot be what he's referring to.
Wade, you got your hand raised, brother. You got something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to ask the rabbi on that subject. What's the Talmud or the Torah? I don't know about the Torah. Well, I looked into the Torah about mental illness. You know, that, and a lot of things that are out there. Is that just something that is just something we have to deal with, as in people that have to deal with that? Is there something in the Talmud that, you know, brings up about that subject?
So once I was in Israel in a Burl wine shiur, and he said something that was very controversial. Like, it's not controversial to me, but I guess to many people. So he said, because people who study the biographies put out by ArtScroll about rebbes and great rabbis throughout history, how they would describe what these people would do, it's virtually identical to what's been classified as mental illness today. How they would stay up for like days at a time, and then they would sleep for weeks at a time, and they would disappear for their communities, and they would be found in a trash heap in some self-imposed exile. All these things, he said, that nowadays would be categorized as some sort of mental illness. And it's true, but Jewish history records them as spiritually connected to God, that this is a sign that they had God within them in their lives, you know, that they walked with God because they did such weird things. They were clearly schizophrenic, bipolar, they had OCD. The Rambam writes, and also his son mentions, that any type of medical advice given by the rabbis, you should toss away if it contradicts the medical advice of your day and age. And that's what we're supposed to do. There's some medical advice given in the Talmud that would make you more sick. So knowing that, that should also tell us that any sort of mental illness they would probably attribute to demons and evil spirits. The job of the rabbis are not to be doctors or to give medical advice, just like the job of the Torah is not to be a history book. The job of the rabbis there to build consensus on how you keep ceremonial law within a agrarian society called Israel. And the job of the Torah is there to give you God's will. The Torah, the commandments within what we call the Torah. What we call the Torah today is not the Torah. It's the commandments within the Torah, the instructions, that's what Torah means, that we believe came from God. I wouldn't listen to medical advice that comes from the rabbis. And I know that people are big fans of Ezekiel bread and stuff like that. Okay, enjoy it, this and that, but don't think that this is food sanctioned by God. But eating carobs. Carob is a big thing that people eat during Lag BaOmer, because Elijah ate carobs in the cave from the carob tree. It's this long, black, nasty thing, whatever. They put tons of sugar in it in Israel. Shimon Bar Yochai also, because the story really came from Elijah being in a cave, it teaches that God made a carob tree grow in his cave, and they also ate carobs, and that's how they stayed alive. I wouldn't listen to medical advice from Tanakh or the Talmud if it contradicted modern day medical advice.
I've heard some pretty liberal rabbis say that, and I'm not saying I believe this, but they're out in the West Coast where I lived for like 20 years, and they're saying that a kosher diet is very unhealthy.
Well, it depends. If you include latkes and cholent as a staple of your diet, then yes.
Someone once told me if I only
donuts.
eat kosher, I wouldn't have to worry about ever getting cancer.
There's another saying that says that the food you eat on Shabbos doesn't make you gain weight. Something stupid.
Your second soul absorbs it, yeah.
Sufganiyot, all the donuts, the greasy donuts. It's funny. This actually goes back. Like eating donuts for Hanukkah was mentioned by the Rambam's father. I'm not sure if it was a story written about him or something he wrote of the community, of his community, eating fried dough and sugar for Hanukkah. But yeah, I mean, Jews have been eating unhealthy for years. Kosher food is not unhealthy. There's no law to eat latkes or eat chamantashen or sufganiyot for Hanukkah, right? I mean, this is just a custom. You guys could not eat that. There was an idea that eating dairy and fish together made you sick. Proven false later on, but I think Sephardim now, they still don't eat it because of that, just because it was mentioned as a statement, not by the Talmud, but by later rabbis.
Well, my cholesterol is high, and I'm looking into more vegetables and fruits. But I'm wondering now if the vegetarian diet is more healthy, why didn't God give? I mean, He did initially give in the Garden of Eden a vegetarian lifestyle, and then after Noah, they started eating meat. So I'm wondering why God would go to a less healthy meat eating for people like myself who have high cholesterol. Why God goes to make these items kosher? Any comments?
It's not a statement in the Talmud. It's not understood in the Talmud that Adam and Eve were vegetarian. It just seems so far-fetched that anyone could survive without protein at that time. In their region, perhaps they didn't have beans. I mean, now in the Middle East, I think Farber beans are very famous. People needed meat to survive. So the understanding, I think there's a medrash that teaches that they ate meat, but an angel would come down and slaughter it for them, or they ate meat and they would eat meat that would die on its own. But I don't think it was a popular notion that they didn't eat meat. Now, well, there were famous rabbis who didn't eat meat regularly, like Rav Kook, Rav Avraham Cohen Cook. I also heard recently that the Vilna Gaon also didn't eat meat. But both of these guys, the story is that, I don't know if this is true, that on Shabbat, they would eat a little piece of chicken because there's a statement in the Talmud that says, Ein simcha ela basar hayayim, that there's no joy without meat and wine. There's other rabbis who've interpreted this to mean that this is only if it brings you joy. If eating meat doesn't bring you joy, then it doesn't apply. Basad is more red meat. It doesn't even, I'm not sure why they include even chicken. I mean, assuming that chicken fulfilled that obligation. And wine also. Wine and grape juice really have the same status.
Similar to, I think I heard Dennis Prager say that we are commanded in the Torah to be happy at Passover.
Every holiday,
I didn't know
you're commanded to be happy, but there's two in particular. There's Sukkot and then Pesach. So there's two that it's actually mentioned as an extra dose of happiness. Gil Locks made a whole video on it where he has people shaking the lulav in front of the kotel. Like he reminds them of the pasuk that says to be happy on that day. Apart from being happy in all Yom Tovim, on Mamish Sukkos, there's an actual extra statement to be happy, but we'll find it by the end of the day.
King David Sukkah, we're going to get it rebuilt soon? What's going on with that?